Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are going to be discussing creative activism, pop culture meets politics. So I'd like to start with a quote by Ernst Fischer. In a decaying society, art, if it is truthful, must also reflect decay. And unless it wants to break faith with its social function, art must show the world as changeable and help to change it. So today we are going to be discussing precisely about this topic at large with Eleanor Goldfield. She's a political activist, writer, singer, and front woman of her own band, Rooftop Revolutionaries. She is very much willing to share with us her own experience on how she's become an activist, an artist, and a very solid and young voice in relation to exposing the world as it is and getting ourselves engaged into becoming an active part to change the world. So thank you for being here, Eleanor.
Thank you for having me.
So to everyone that is watching, please remember that there are questions and comments that are available if you're watching on the Google event. If you're watching on the YouTube video as the recorded version, please leave a comment as well. And if it's a direct question for Eleanor, we will make sure that she gets it. We will be talking for about 40 minutes, so please make sure that you do get your questions around that time. And we are talking to her from Washington, D.C., and I'm in Mexico. So let's get on to our discussion, Eleanor. So you came up with the term creative activism. What is it all about?
Creative activism is simply using creative mediums to promote a message of social and political change. So that's art, film, photography, street theater, music. It's any creative or artistic medium using that to promote a message of social and political change.
So in terms of what aligns with your perspective, how you're using art, as we've known, art has many times taken the use of propaganda either to, continue a certain type of regime and getting people a bit brainwashed about certain principles, which doesn't mean that art has always been used for common good, but also to kind of instill certain principles. So how do you use art in this regard? What kind of principles do you want to promote with it?
Well, I think the point of art as propaganda just speaks to the power of art. It speaks to how powerful art can be in shifting people's paradigms and making people believe a certain thing. So if you can use that art for good, then you can engage people in the world around them. You can engage them in activism and social and political change. So that's the idea, is even something as simple as using, for example, a modeling shot, and instead of it saying, Gucci or Armani, it says income inequality. You grab people's attention with a very striking, beautiful image, and then you give them some information that they are not getting through mainstream media, through any sort of pop culture medium. So you use it. It's sort of insidious, I guess. It's sort of on the down low. You don't want to let people know necessarily that you're doing it this way, but you are engaging them through an entertaining medium. They'll walk into a rock club and they don't expect to be engaged politically. They expect to see a rock show, and then by the end of it, they have engaged politically. Same. You just have mediums that humanity has at their disposal, and you infuse those with this idea of social and political change and the betterment and the evolution of humankind.
Yes, which is something that is very much required, even more so in the context of how we are imbued with all kinds of media and entertainment that, as you've said before, it's all about songs that are meaningless and that do not really provide any sort of life-changing type of lyrics or that make you think and ponder what kind of system or world are we living in, what's our responsibility to it. So let's first begin with your background. How did you said you've been an activist throughout your entire life, so can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so the way I explain activism to people is pretty simple, because I think there is an unfortunate cultural paradigm around activism that it's a very extremist or conspiracy theorist mentality. It's not. Activism is really just being active in the world around you. It's being an active participant in things that are going on. So as my activism started when I was a kid, and I would just run around the neighborhood and pick up trash because I just didn't like the way it looked. And I didn't think to myself, oh, I'm an environmental activist. I just did that because it seemed like the right thing to do. And then that progressed into more environmental activism into my teens, and then around 2003, when the Iraq War happened, I became very heavily involved in the anti-war movement, and then so it kind of went from there. But it really started as just a mental state of being actively involved in my surroundings, and that's what I think. That really is activism, and that's why I think that act of itself is not a bad word. It's not a creepy word. It's not a scary word. It's really just about being present in the space and time that you're in, and noticing something, saying, hey, I think that's fucked up, and then doing something about it.
Yeah, that's a practical way to look at it, and really strip it away from any kind of radicalism that is usually associated with. I fully agree on that. We call it practivism, actually, because it's like you focus on practical aspects at the same time. So in this, how do you then deal with these perceptions, or the things that, for example, groups like Occupy Wall Street have done? What's your perspective on it? Has it been useful? Why not? How would you direct it or change it if you had the ability to? Or maybe you're already doing something about it.
Well, I think Occupy is, of course, a very it's the center example when people think of activism, and then I think that's a good thing and a bad thing, because what Occupy managed to do was change the conversation. Before Occupy, people weren't really discussing income inequality. They weren't really discussing the corporatocracy that we have in this country that spread to nations around the world. People weren't really talking about these issues, and what Occupy did was shift the conversation, despite of all the negative press that they got. And a lot of that negative press is just part of the system of propaganda that our mainstream media likes to put out there. But a lot of it was the fault of Occupy, and I think as activists who were involved in Occupy, we have to accept that and learn from that. One of the things that I feel was a big problem with Occupy is that they did not recognize that you need to have a hierarchy. You need to have, there's no such thing as a leaderless movement. Look at the civil rights movement, look at the anti-war movement, the suffragette movement. You need to have a hierarchy that allows you to function as a single, very focused and directed entity. And Occupy missed out on that chance, but on the other side, there's so many great organizations that stemmed from Occupy that have that hierarchy, that understand that you have to have leaders in place, that you do have to have connection with the system. You can't just say we're outside the system, because there's no such thing. That's like saying we're outside the food chain. So you have to plug into that and get that hierarchy in place. And that's something in particular that I think that shifting of the paradigm again is something that I'm working on with the work that I'm doing for Occupy.com. I'm trying to take the name Occupy and get it out of people's heads as, again, this radicalized, this super conspiracy theorist movement, and take it back to what at the core it really was. It was a bunch of people coming together saying that this is not okay, this income inequality, this oligarchy, it's not okay, and we, the 99%, want the power of the people back, and we want the power of the corporatocracy taken away.
So is there any plan of making Occupy a political party, for example, or a definitive political proposal that can really get into the system?
There were a few people from the Occupy movement that started their own party called the After Party, but as far as I know, that there's no in the Occupy circles that I'm in, there's no move to really start a political party. I think, in my opinion, the best thing to do right now is to, not just as Occupy, but just as activists in general, is to open up the view outside of this two-party system and widen that view to look at, for example, Jill Stein of the Green Party, or the independents, or to widen the view to look at existing third parties as opposed to trying to start your own party, because that's a lot of work. I think it's easier, and in the end, I think it'll be more progressive, and it'll be more beneficial to plug into those parties that are already existing and use them to really get your points heard, because somebody like Jill Stein, for example, already has a tremendous following. So if you like her to really plug into what the needs and wants are of this particular constituency, then that would be a great link up as opposed to trying to cobble together your own party. And I think that also speaks to the concept of working within the system. When I lived in California, the voter turnout in my age group, 18 to 30, was atrocious. And unfortunately, there were a lot of good people, Marianne Williamson, Derek Cressman, Ted Lieu. There were a lot of good people that were running. That Ted Lieu did win, but Marianne Williamson and Derek Cressman did not, because voter turnout was nothing. And so there are people running. People have to understand that. There are people that are trying to get into office to speak for you, but you have to go and speak. You have to let your voice be heard and say, I want that. And that's an interesting thing, again, about the Occupy movement, is that when people my age were polled as to what their political senses were, most of them registered left of center, almost socialist. So if you bring those people to the polls, then you would have someone like a Jill Stein or a Bernie Sanders, or even further left. It's just that you have to get people out, and that's also part of that debunking the activist paradigm and debunking the concept that being into politics is uncool.
Absolutely, and that's something that we fully agree on, to make politics not something that you get into because you want to get good money or want to, have some kind of power over people. That's the old paradigm, and we have to redefine politics in a way that it's just an extension of us realizing there's changes to be made, so we have to get ourselves into it. So let's discuss this, because you were mentioning getting people into this. Art kills apathy, or art killing apathy. Apathy being like one of the biggest obstacles that I fully agree with you is preventing us from really getting interested in this kind of topic. So how have you worked with it?
Well, I think that it goes back to the original concept of art being able to bring people together and engaging them sort of without them even realizing that they're engaging to start with. So I think apathy is of course the biggest hurdle, and art has the unique way of killing that by engaging people and entertaining them. And when you entertain someone, they'll want to keep coming back to it. It's like the magic weight loss pill. If you notice that you're losing weight, then you'll keep taking it. If you notice that you're having fun in this space of art and creativity, you'll keep coming back to that. And that's why Art Killing Apathy is about working with different organizations and promoting the idea of artful activism, whether that be street theater, whether that be music or photography or documentaries. And so that's how you get people in, get them to keep coming back.
And from your perspective, you have to also consider that many people might react in a not so great manner about this, or immediately label, stuff like that. What have you encountered in terms of people's response to what you do?
It's been mostly good, actually. Most of the people, because I think the difference is it's the difference between preaching to someone and offering them sort of an engaging entertainment. So I think that's the difference. If you stand up there and preach to someone, they're going to shut off. They're going to think that you're an asshole. They're going to just completely tune out. If you come to somebody, make them laugh, you show them a cool piece of art, you play them a song that they start singing along to, I think that's a very powerful message that is inclusive. You're asking them to interact with you. So people's responses have been mostly very positive, because they feel that they're interacting with the art, they feel like they're interacting with the issue, and that's part of what you're doing. Is you're not only giving them an art form, you're also having them interact with the issue and showing them how it's about them and how it's important for them, so they feel very included as opposed to just being talked at.
So you talk about comedy with purpose on this. So how do you see this as an effective tool, as you were mentioning, and what is the role in also, getting people into also becoming part of this new movement? Because there's a response that can be supportive, as in saying, yes, I like what you do. Have you had people saying, hey, how can I do it as well, or how can I join the movement? Like getting to the next step, so to speak.
Absolutely, and that is a very important next step that I think a lot of times people miss out on. Like the climate march, for example, in New York, that hundreds of thousands of people showed up for, and then what? You know, you had all these people show up for an amazing event, but they had no list of demands. They had no cohesive reason as to why they were there, besides just saying, like, we like the planet, which, great. I mean, not to discount that, but you missed a huge opportunity there. So I think one of the things that I'm trying to do with this show that I'm doing with Occupy.com, it's showing people how they can get involved. And that's anything from posting a tweet to actually protesting in the streets. And there's a very important commentary there as well to say that, like, you know, everybody can do something. Everybody has the ability to plug into these movements in some way, whether that be a tweet or whether that be a bake sale. I don't know, you know, get creative with it. That's the whole point of creative activism. It's not just art. It is also the idea of getting creative with how you can contribute. So yeah, I think that plugging people into the movement once that they've learned what's going on, I think that's a very, very powerful next step and a very important one.
So in terms of your ability to do all of this stuff, many people might say, oh, well, but, you know, funding an organization costs money. So how have you managed to also get that part on your side if you're up to discussing it?
Well, luckily there are good people with money. Not every person with money is a sociopath. So there has been a lot of what I do is funded by nonprofits who get donations from people. So probably a lot of my funding, a lot of my ability to do this and to live off of it comes from donations. So it really is sort of a circular a cycle, if you will. People are paying into these organizations because they believe in them, and then these organizations are feeding back out and trying to help people on these issues. So really, I mean, there's no millionaire behind it, unfortunately. I would like to see more millionaires and billionaires shift towards the side of good, but there's an inherent flaw in that system. So.
Yeah, I was also watching documentaries throughout the weekend in relation to good ideas that haven't been actually funded because it kind of threatens the current establishment, and maybe they give like very relevant ideas that could shift people's awareness of, oh yeah, we can change the system from within. So from your perspective, how can you make of this activism movement the most effective, considering the current limitations, such as you don't get corporate media support, you can be also mostly ostracized at times from the greater art world, so to speak. How do you walk through these limitations?
Well, I think there's a very powerful shift that's happening right now. Alternative media, mostly on the internet, has a tremendous ability to push through the typical mediums and platforms. As an artist myself, as a musician myself, I know that there have been several bands that now make a living purely outside of the typical structure of the music industry. They don't have a record label, they don't have a manager, they don't have a... So that's really... You don't actually need the old paradigm, and that's the same thing with media. We don't need TV. Most people under the age of 65 don't actually watch TV. So that's the thing. You're giving people the space to reach out on platforms that are free, and that's why the issue of net neutrality is so important. Because as we continue on this path of technology, people will have the ability to reach out in artistic and creative ways and push for social and political change through the internet and through places that do not require you to have a lot of money or to subscribe to the typical paradigms or the typical systems that kept artists and kept writers and kept all these creative and activist people past.
We have a question, first of all, from Max Assad. What's the topic about? We're discussing creative activism and pop culture meets politics with Eleanor Goldfield. So if you have any comments, questions, send them through. We have a question from Daryl Thomas. He's saying, one of the problems of art being used as a populist catalyst is that art has never been able to rise above its inherent commoditization to effect real social change. Art used as protest has always converted to commercialized ends. Can art ever be more?
Well, first of all, I would respectfully disagree with that. Art has never art has risen above its commoditization The most easy and recent example, of course, is the 60s. Look at Bob Dylan, look at Joan Baez, look at Apocalypse Now, look at the art in the suffragette movement, the pamphlets that were done by artists that flooded the streets. Art has always been a part of a protest movement. If you look back into the past, I challenge you to find a movement that was successful in getting social or political change that did not have a pop culture component to it. I bet you it's impossible. And the reason is that pop culture is the heartbeat, it's the soul of a generation. And when that soul of a generation pushes for something as powerful as social and political change, the powers that be cannot withstand it. They will topple, they will fall, they won't be able to go against it. And of course, we didn't get everything we wanted in the anti-war movement, we didn't get everything we wanted in the civil rights movement, but significant change was made, and that is largely in part due to the role of artists and the role of creative people. And when I say artists, I don't just mean painters, I mean musicians and writers, poets, and all of those things. So I think that is actually a very powerful thing in protest and political movements. In terms of it being commercialized, I think that artists should be paid for what they do. I think that, the whole copyright laws, I don't completely agree with how those are instituted in this country, but I do believe that an artist should be paid just like a doctor or somebody who works as a grocer or something like that. I think that if you are a creative person and your contribution to society is to paint, is to write, then you should be given money for that. Enough to survive, and until we're on this, purely until we get to some sort of barter system. So I think the question of can art ever be more, I'm not really sure what you mean by that, because I think art is more. Art is and I mean, not to get too philosophical, but art is everywhere, and art is in every facet of our lives, and art can be used to promote tremendous social change. It can also be used for evil. It's that concept of a knife. If you use it for carving a piece of wood and making a beautiful piece of art, great. If you use it to kill someone, that's not great. Art is a tool, and I think art can be used to promote tremendous good, and it has in the past.
We have another question coming in from Jean Kenny. She's saying, climate change is an example of the oligarchy using good intentions to pursue international agendas like Agenda 21. How do we recognize large bureaucratic oligarchies that pose as humanitarians through funding nonprofits and using nonprofits?
Well, yeah, I think, I'm not sure if there's an art aspect to that question, but I think in terms of governments posing as humanitarians, look at USAID. They pose as an aid entity organization, and they do the exact opposite. So I think the U.S. is excellent at going into countries under the guise of aid, under the guise of freedom, and destroying them. And I think in terms of how do we recognize that, I think, again, this goes back to the concept of alternative media and really making sure that we can get these messages out so that people know, because Fox News is not going to tell you, CNN, ABC, they're all part of the same propaganda machine. So it really is about getting information out to people, using the tools and the platforms that we have available to us because of technology, and promoting that knowledge. Propagating knowledge, getting that spread in any creative form, anything from informational articles, speeches, to, again, street theater and things like that. It's just about getting that information out there so that they can't hide from the honest truth that we're doing these things and the people know about it.
Yeah, there's this thing with these kind of organizations that pose as grassroots levels type of organizations, such as Citizens for Environmentalism or whatever, and they're mostly funded by, let's say, if one is for environmentalism, it's funded by ExxonMobil, and this is also shown in the documentary Emergence of Doubt that I just recently watched. So how can you also share with people how to become aware of this kind of covert type of associations? And if you found a way out to really find out if they are for real, so to speak.
Well, I think, I mean, I think you almost answered your own question there, because you said in this documentary that I watched, documentaries have soared in the past few years, mostly because of Netflix. I think something like 200% had the amount that people are watching documentaries, which is phenomenal. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, our ability to watch it, but a lot of that has to do with people getting tired of this sort of, I don't know what's going on, and I don't know, like, this is, I'm tired of feeling like I'm in this bubble, this vacuum of information. And that, again, people are going to start looking for things, and if you put it out there for them to find, then they will find it. And it's the same thing, like a lot of people, I know a few people that use cat videos to promote messages of change. Why? Because cat videos make up 15% of all internet traffic. That's a lot. So if you put a cat video up there with like 2 cats talking about School of the Americas, all of a sudden you have a viral video about the School of the Americas, and that's tremendous. So I think it really comes back to that concept of use what we have, and we have the most powerful form and platform of communication that humankind has ever known. So it's on par with the advent of the printing press. All of a sudden, you can get this information out there en masse, and so use that. And you don't have to be an artist. You could literally just like drag a picture of a cat onto your desktop and then put some message onto it. I guarantee it'll get likes just because it has a cat on it.
I would agree here in the sense that we have to use that kind of very attractive type of medium in order to get some message out. But also there's like a willingness there, you know, like you will yourself to maybe draw this cat or draw this little animation or whatever, or just some words, and be willing to speak up. But many times people go into, once again, this apathy of, oh, what's the point? No one's going to watch it. No one's going to read the blog. No one's going to see me speaking. No one's going to watch this hangout. So why bother? What's your response to this?
My response to this is the same response that I used to give people as a personal trainer. You know, oh, it doesn't matter that I'm fat, whatever. It's like, well, no, it doesn't matter to me that you're fat, but if you actually if you want to better yourself, then you're just going to have to go ahead and do it, regardless of whether someone notices. And I think that's part of the issue too, is that not just apathy, but this sort of, you know, like me, like me, like me. How many likes did I get on that Instagram picture? How many? And so I think a lot of people feel that they're not doing a good job, or they're not validated unless someone else tells them. And I think that's also a paradigm issue in this generation. The idea of doing good just to do good is a bit lost. It's a bit hazy and fuzzy for a lot of people in my generation. And I think that speaks to the concept that I try to tell people about. In order to have this social evolution, you have to first have a personal evolution and realize that I don't need to do something just so that somebody will come to my gallery showing. I need to do something because I need to say this. I need to get this off my chest. And if you're doing something just because you want people to notice you, then no, it's probably not going to work out, because as of right now, activism is not a very spotlit industry. It's not a very spotlit job. So if that's what you're after, then I would suggest that you try shifting your paradigm. But also, I mean, it is true. Like in this area of art, chances are you might get the spotlight. But again, I think it has to come from a personal evolution standpoint, that you want to do something because you want to be better. And same thing, it's just like losing weight. You want to do it because you want to do it for you, not because you want to do it for someone else. I want to put this tweet out because I think it's important that people know that animal cruelty is wrong. That's it.
I fully agree on that, because many times we lose perspective of what is the point of it all, and the point is ourselves. What I see is meaningful. What I see should be done. So on that regard, also in terms of every human being can be an artist, which is something that Joseph Beuys would say. We also agree on that perception of ourselves, or that understanding of ourselves as an instrument that can become an advocate for things that really matter, and you're simply like this matter that makes yourself available to these kind of changes and purposes that are a little bit selfless, so to speak, not for personal benefit or gain, but you just becoming a spokesperson for something that can encourage another to start investigating about subjects that matter.
speaking to that point, it's also, and I tell this to people who have sort of a Randian concept of things where, you know, being selfish is good, and I speak to that and say, actually, the concept of being selfless is actually relatively selfish, because it does make you feel really good. So you're actually having this this sort of what's the word? You're actually selfishly making yourself feel better by being selfless, and that's a bit of a mind fuck. But it is sort of it's a type of hedonism, I think, because I nothing gets me off like going to a protest or writing a really good article that I feel really good about, that I know is going out there, and that I got that off my chest, and I was able to share those thoughts and share my knowledge and share my research. That makes me feel really good. So in a sense, that is selfish. So I think, again, like there's a direct link between being selfless and gaining some sort of selfish hedonism off of it.
Okay, we have a question from Joku, and he's saying, I find that anytime large sums of money or large foundations get into the mix of social change, often the intent change becomes warped, or at worst co-opted and shifted into institution-friendly paradigms. And there's no second part of his question, so Joku, if you can share it. We have another question from Daryl Thomas, so I'll keep that question there. An example of art being co-opted by the world system to protect itself from lasting social change. Consider the protest movement of the 60s that seemingly brought a wave of change has now been rolled back with a sharp reduction of many civil rights. So how effective has art really been over the long haul? I'm not saying art hasn't been useful as a populist tool to raise social awareness. It's just that it hasn't been able to effect lasting changes so far.
Well, I think the problem there is that I think, Daryl, you're thinking a little too one and you're done. Humanity is not a single event. Art is not a single event. Humanity is an ongoing experience, and I think art is the same thing. So the fact that art and pop culture in the 60s were able to promote so much social and political change is tremendous, but then that dropped off. In the beginning of the 70s, you saw the people sort of stepped back because they felt disillusioned. There was basically like a fuck you moment where people in the early 70s were like, you know what, Vietnam, MLK, RFK, JFK, I can't do this anymore, I'm out. And so they stepped back from social and political activism. The rise of the neocons happened in the early 70s. You saw us just go bold into South America, Chile, Argentina. We were like, you know what, people aren't watching anymore, fuck this. And you really saw pop culture draw back. Pop culture became all about hedonism, the bad kind, drugs and sex and disco. It was all about tuning out and just paying attention to your own gluttony. And so I think this concept that art hasn't affected lasting change is incorrect, because even still today, even after the pitfalls of the 70s where everybody moved back away from activism and government went really off the deep end, even after that you still see the positive effects of what happened in the 60s. You still see people hearkening back to those messages, to those images, those movies. You still see people hearkening back to the art of that era as a powerful message for social and political change. So I have to disagree and say that it has had a lasting effect. It's just that we didn't continue on with it. We felt like, okay, well, we got a few things, we lost a few other things, and we're done. As opposed to saying, great, we're going to use what we got, and we're going to continue to fight. And so I think that's the thing. You have to have that follow through. That's why even when there's a victory, such as, you know, the upcoming net neutrality decision, give yourself a pat on the back, you know, take a shot, whatever you got to do, but continue the fight. Wake up the next morning and say, okay, what else can I do? Because the truth of the matter is that the sociopaths, the oligarchs, are not going to take the day off. So you have to keep fighting in a creative and in a productive way, because art, you can't expect to just put out one single piece of art and then be done. It is an ongoing battle. And again, I still think you do see the positive effects of what happened in the 60s and 70s, but you have to keep going with it.
Yes, it is a work in progress, and it will really be done until we see like a world that is fair and just for everyone, and everyone is having like a dignified living, which is part of our principles and commitment for life in relation to why we do this and the point that we see in doing it. So we have part 2 of Joku's question. Maybe you can also see it. Would you say that art and pop culture have value as social capital rather than monetary capital? And should there be a clear delineation between art as activism and money institutions as activism?
Art and pop culture have value as social capital. Yes, I do think that art and pop culture have value as social capital because they are, I mean, culture, artists are the voice of a generation. And so that's a tremendous social capital. It's a tremendous cultural capital. The thing is that, and this is where, you know, that discussion about monetization comes into play. Should you monetize somebody's passion? Should you monetize somebody, like a piece of their soul, their art? And again, I think that you should, because somebody, just like a chef gets paid to make food, and that's a bit of their expression of their soul, of themselves. And I think, you know, art that's not food is in the same category. In terms of a clear delineation between art as activism and like money institutions as activism, I think money as activism is not, money isn't activism, just like money isn't speech. Money is the ability to create art. You know, you need paintbrushes, you need paint, or you need a microphone. Money should not be considered anything but a means to an end, in my opinion, because I think so often these days money gets treated as the end goal, and I think that's a huge issue with things socially, politically, economically, even mentally, spiritually, etc. So in terms of a delineation between them, I think there is. I think there is a clear delineation between them, and I think most activists would say that institutions or money is not activism. It's what we do with them. It's how we use them to create what we're trying to say. It's how we use them to create our message. So I think there is a clear delineation. In terms of the mainstream media, I think there's no delineation between any activism at all. It's all bad. It's all evil. It's all creepy and extremist and conspiracy theorist. So yes, I do think that there is a clear delineation, and if there isn't in a certain space or time that you're experiencing, I'd say that there definitely should be, because again, money is not the end goal. It's not the art. It's not the final product. It is merely a means to create that.
Yes, and in relation to your incursion into this alternative media realm, how have you managed that? Because maybe many people have the idea of wanting to do the same, and you've managed to place yourself into media that is recognizable by a lot of people, like RT, interviews, and other publications. So how did you do it?
Honestly, it's just reaching out. I think it's about putting yourself out there and saying and being very, very strong in your viewpoints, and making sure that you do your research, of course. But it's really just about putting yourself out there. And I think that the activism community, just like the music industry, just like the art industry, it's pretty incestuous. It's pretty small. So we all know each other. So once you step into that space. And again, you have to be coming back to the money issue, when you start, you have to be willing to do things for free. You have to be willing to help out and really show people that you are adamant about these issues, you're adamant about this, and you want to really promote social and political change. You're not just there to make money, or you're not just there to look cool. And I think that would be the same in any space. You know, if you wanted to intern at a restaurant, if they just saw that you were there to wear an apron, you wouldn't be there for very long. So I think it's the same thing here. Just go to a protest and meet whoever's running the protest. You know, go into an online community and start speaking to people there and start debating. Because I think what people really appreciate in these activist communities is people who step in and want to learn, but also want to share what they've learned. They also want to share what their experiences are, and they want to share how they can help inspire, how they might be inspired. So it's really, I think it's a very inclusive community. So just step in there and start talking.
just do it type of thing.
Do it, basically.
Okay, so we have another question from Jane Kenny. Have you considered working with artists, performers, and renting space for live performances that can be videotaped and placed on YouTube, etc., like a show with comedians, musicians, and artists?
That's a great question, and yes, it is a great idea as well. It's something that I'm sort of doing with this show that I'm going to be doing. It's not so much a performance space, but I have done shows with comedians and done, like the Rolling Rebellion, for example, is a nationwide wave of actions that focus on artful activism. In terms of a specific space, I don't have the capital for that. That's definitely something that I would love to create, is an artistic and activist space. I think what's more likely to happen in the near future is to have a tour built up around the concept of art and activism, which is something that I'm in the planning stages of. But again, the show will be about showcasing activist art and allowing people, activists and artists, to have that platform. So yes, that's a great idea, and if anybody wants to throw in the capital for that, please do.
You can start a Kickstarter project for that, or an open source type of community that is willing to become part of the organization in each city. I mean, we can use these tools in the end. So that's cool. Thanks, Jean, for your comment question. And we have one from Mats Bjornsti from Norway. He's saying, I'm not too sure about the positive effects in regards to art. Art is mostly intertwined with money-making. What other than justified drug abuse has art brought us?
Well, I think that last question must be a joke. I can't even answer the last question because I think it's a joke. But in terms of the positive effects of art, there's so many examples, not just in the activist world, just in terms of opening people's eyes, you could stand in front of a Rothko and then all of a sudden feel really calm and at peace and feel like you just did a 1-hour yoga class. I mean, the positive effects of art are endless. And I think in terms of it being intertwined with money, I just like to say that I am probably on the poor side of making just enough money to survive. So I'm over here, but I would consider myself an artist. I think the problem is that you might be confusing art with performance. For example, Katy Perry is not an artist, she's a performer. Same thing with, and that's not a bad thing, I think that that's a fine thing, but don't confuse art with performance.
Or big industry that is supporting that kind of
exactly,
show.
And don't confuse somebody's rise to fame with their creative conscience. So I think that's the difference, and those shouldn't be confused because they're two totally separate things.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you very quickly on the subject of living income, because we shared with you the proposal. What's your perspective? Do you support basic income?
I do. I think that the nuances, particularly in a country like the US, the nuances would definitely need to be worked out a bit. I mean, in short, yes, I do. I do support the concept of living income. I do believe that everybody has a right to a certain amount of money to survive. But a lot of that is dependent on how the economy is built. So, of course, living income fluctuates depending on what the standard of living is, what the price of living is. But yeah, I think that the concept of people being homeless, the concept of people not having enough money to eat is ludicrous, because there's plenty of food. There's plenty of there's a comedian who does the line, a comedian, Lee Camp, who's an activist comedian, who says that saying that there's not enough food for the people is like saying that that a builder doesn't have enough inches to build something. It just doesn't make any sense. You have enough nails to build. You have enough food. It's just that you don't feel like you want to make enough time to create the inches. You don't want to feel like you want to go through the hassle of building it. there's plenty of resources for all of the people on this planet and then some. So it's just a matter of switching our oligarchical forms of government, our corporatocratic way of thinking, and shifting that into a guaranteed living income. And I think that that's a phenomenal concept, and it's really sort of like a common sense concept if you think about it. So the only reason that this is being fought, the same reason that the common sense concept of fresh water is being fought, is because of this money over all else, people over profit over people, war over peace. And so, yeah, I highly support that concept.
And what's your perspective on getting money out of politics? I know that you're quite an advocate of that. Maybe that way we could also get the living income into politics. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think money in politics is the main cancer from which all other cancers stem, and that is the issue that bars us from dealing with any other issue. So money in politics is the barrier that keeps us from living income, from good education, socialized health care. That is what keeps us from all of those good things that we can have. But we first have to get through this concept of money buying speech, and money buying freedom, and money buying laws.
Yes, and we also say that you cannot really be an advocate for human rights if there's no funding to provide those human rights. So that's why basic income is just common sense, as you were mentioning as well. So Eleanor, any last words that you'd like to share to motivate people to get out of that tunnel vision mode wherein nothing else matters and really get involved?
Yeah, I would say just don't think of activism as something scary. Think of it as something fun. Just like when I was a personal trainer, don't be scared of squats. Just find a fun way of doing them. I think putting yourself into activism should be fun, and you shouldn't try to be something that you're not. You know, whatever your passion is, find the social and political parallel to that. And also, my show Act Out on Occupy.com will start on March 4th. So please, I would love for you guys to engage with that on Facebook, online. It's Facebook/Act Out on Occupy. And any ideas you have for shows, any comments that you want to send, I look forward to them.
Okay, so you will give us the link so that people can follow you in all of your, social media, from your band to this show and the rest of it, your website as well. So thanks a lot for being here, and also to invite people to continue the discussion, because that's what this Hangout is all about. And if you have any further questions for Eleanor, leave them in the comment section, as well as ensuring that you watch and tune in to our next Hangout as well, next Sunday, same time. Thank you, Eleanor. Good night. Goodbye.